Misophonia. Chances are, if you felt anger or even rage from the intro, you may have misophonia, a disorder in which sounds trigger an emotional or even a physical response. While an average person would describe sounds such as or as annoying or even nearly unnoticeable, someone with misophonia would describe the noise as something that could drive you crazy, and it may seem funny or even dramatic to you. It can seriously compromise things like your social life, eating habits, and even your mental health. It's also a bit more common than people usually expect, possibly affecting up to 15% of the world's adult population. Average hearing people rated babies crying and women screaming as highly disturbing, as did the people with misophonia, while sounds like chewing and breathing were rated much less disturbing, but the people with misophonia rated them just as disturbing as babies crying. While it's usually human noises that trigger a reaction, it could also include things like tapping or typing. These sounds increase stress, invoke anger, anxiety, and even disgust. Some people with the disorder feel that because it's not physical, that they're overreacting and try to suppress it, which can increase physical effects, things like a faster heartbeat, tension, shaking, and sweating, which can cause chronic stress, as being near to a eating or even breathing human is actually quite common, because apparently we need to do those things every day. This chronic stress they endure can actually lessen their life by almost 3 years, so you're literally chewing these people's lives away. While misophonia is not curable, the US has many clinics with a variety of treatments, including helping the worst of the worst cases, from providing distraction methods and offering headphones, all the way to cognitive behavioral therapy, helping to improve the life quality and eventually the daily functioning with the terrible torture of misophonia. The Willowbrook State School. From 1942 to 1987, with almost 6,000 patients, Willowbrook was the largest institute housing people with disabilities. This facility was understaffed to the point they would only have 2 people for every 70. The requirement was a 4-to-1 ratio, but they were operating at a 35-to-1 ratio, and was so ill-kept, they had a 100% infection rate for hepatitis after a 6-month stay. The patients were mainly separated by how severe the disabilities were, and the less they could explain how bad the conditions were to their families, the worse it was. Rooms the size of your standard classroom would have 70 people in it, mainly kids, just sitting around all day every day. There would be human excrement sprawled out all over the floor, while kids would hop and roll around, and the smell was described as nearly unbearable. 80% of the patients couldn't even feed themselves, and mealtime was supposed to be 30 minutes for each patient, but because of so little time, and so many people having to be fed by hand, everyone's mealtime was cut to 2 minutes each, leaving many of them malnourished. For the 70 adults in a room, it was a bit less spacious, and they were generally left unattended. Fights would break out, and no one would be there to stop it, leaving the more timid patients to be battered and bruised. With little to no activity, their boredom and frustration gave way to anger, and in turn, more fights. Without caretaker interaction, their ability to communicate properly worsened over time. In these schools, the development of social skills are important for a stable inpatient life, but without that, they were just dumped into the rooms with the most people and had no way of asking for better conditions. While usually running around unclothed, diseased, and miserable, when camera crews came by, they would clean up and only allow filming in designated areas, where it looked like your average well-intended school, and was partially the reason why they were able to operate under these conditions for over 40 years. In 1972, a famous expose was created, where Jearrod snuck back in after his little setup was over. They filmed the atrocities these people were secretly going through, hidden away from society in unthinkable conditions. He explained the Willowbrook experience as their life just being hours and hours of endless nothing to do, no one to talk to, no expectations, just living an endless life of misery and filth. The governor at the time, who by the way had a net worth of over $1 billion, believed in not giving any more handouts to the Department of Mental Hygiene. But after years of public outcry, they restored the last of the 3 cuts to the department. Though most of the problems came from understaffing, by the time they got to more employees, they were so behind, they were never able to catch up with all the patients. More homes in the area were getting bad as well, and the caregivers were seen as victims as much as the patients. The downward spiral continued into 1983, when New York finally decided to close Willowbrook for good. The numbers gradually fell until 1987, and the conditions got a bit better towards the end. In 1987, the Willowbrook 1987 stipulation was approved, which set new guidelines from an organization called THIS, now named THIS. Some of these people are still alive today, and they're in their 50s and 60s. This isn't even mentioning the inhumane tests that were run on the patients, and the old human organs found in jars near chemicals. That was obviously covered up. California became the standard of institutes, supplying daycare centers, workshops, physical rehabilitations, ample human interaction, and correct staffing, actually changing the name from institutions and schools to regional centers, and the rest of America followed suit. And though not perfect, the conditions generally got better across the nation, including New York. Top 5 animals expected to go extinct by 2050. Number 5. Cheetahs. Yeah, I know, it's always the cool animals dying. Cheetahs have gone from a healthy 100,000 individuals in the wild to an estimated 5,000 or so, and this isn't their first time facing extinction either. Being affected by climate change and habitat destruction, they get to pick their own demise. They already struggle with breeding in the wild, but the areas they live in are cut off into slices, where it's hard to find others unrelated, so inbreeding is included in their population's decline. Number 4. Polar bears. which are probably the most well-known animal affected by climate change-induced habitat destruction. And while their complete extinction has been estimated at 2100, they're also estimated to hit reproductive failure at 2040, which is the point where it's impossible to create the number of offspring needed to maintain a population. In other words, inevitable extinction. Number 3. Orangutans also face extinction from human causes, mostly from legal logging, but also some illegal logging as well, destroying their homes in the lowland forest. And because we don't have to wait on the climate, we're just cutting down their homes ourselves, they have an estimate of around 2035 before we deforest them off the face of the earth. Number 2. Rhinos. We all know the rhino story. Since the turn of the 20th century, 94% of the rhino population has been wiped out, mostly due to overpoaching, since their horns have high value as gift items, and in some cultures, are thought to have some medicinal properties. Thankfully, anti-rhino poachers are working as hard as they can to keep them alive as long as they can. And number 1, our closest relative on planet Earth, chimpanzees. They, like orangutans, are facing deforestation, and like rhinos, are facing poaching. But unlike those two, also have to deal with their babies being stolen and being dumped off into the pet trade. And I don't think I have to explain how having their babies taken makes it nearly impossible to recoup their numbers in the wild. Chimps went from the millions, a healthy population for their ecosystem, down to the hundreds of thousands, and are on the endangered species list, with a declining population. Mix in lab testing chimps with poaching, deforestation, and the selling of their babies, and you have the perfect storm to wipe out the closest link in our descendant tree that we have to the planet Earth. Time out. Commercial break. Only 7% of you guys are subscribed. Help me change that. 92.4 of you guys subscribe right now while you're watching the video. That way you never miss one of these. The Pixie Stick Killer. The Candyman. The man who killed Halloween. All nicknames for Ronald Clark O'Brien. Born 1944 in Texas, where he would live all his life. By 1974, Ronald would have a wife and 2 kids, age 8 and 5, along with a good job as an optician. During Halloween, he allowed his 2 kids to go one town over to Pasadena, seeing as it had twice the population as the town they live in, and stood within city limits, so it was really only a few blocks away. After a night of fun, Ronald let his kids have one more piece of candy before bed. Timothy, his 8-year-old son, chose a pixie stick, but upon ingesting it, he realized the candy wasn't sweet like usual, but it was bitter, and actually burned. Even after his dad gave him a drink to wash the taste out of his mouth, the burning sensation traveled from his tongue to his stomach and intensified. Feeling this pain, he went to the bathroom where he threw up and eventually passed out and started convulsing. All this, including his death shortly after, happened within just a few minutes, rendering the call for the ambulance useless. After tests were run, it was revealed that there was enough cyanide to kill 4 grown adults in the pixie sticks he had consumed. The news was released, and people from all over Texas started sending in their pixie sticks to get tested. Only 4 more laced with cyanide were found. 1 by the 5-year-old sister, and 3 from the people that Ronald had went with trick-or-treating. Luckily, Ronald knew who passed out the deadly pixie sticks, a random house on the street that they were on that seemed to line up perfectly. Only, the single occupant of the house was caught on camera at work all day and all night, so there was no way candy had came from that house. After that suspicious incident, the police started to secretly investigate Ronald himself. If getting in fights, stealing from work, and being nearly $150,000 in debt weren't suspicious enough for a guy with a so-called perfect life, then the $50,000 life insurance policy it took out on Timothy before he died sure was. With the mortality rate of a child in perfect health being so low, and the poor rate of return, paired with the kid's full life in front of him, it was not common, and is still not a common occurrence for kids to have a life insurance policy. And what makes it worse, less than 13 hours after the death of Timothy, Ronald was on the line trying to collect a life insurance check. Though not incriminating evidence, the visitation to the chemical warehouse in search of cyanide, asking an exterminator how much cyanide can kill a person, and the night Timothy picked his last piece of candy out, his mother said he wanted a lollipop, but Ronald insisted he have a pixie stick instead. We're all pretty incriminating. A knife was even found in the house with the sugar candy residue, the one that was used to replace the candy with the poison. With all of this evidence, on November 5th, 1974, not even a full week after Timothy's death, Ronald was arrested for the murder of his son. He was sentenced to death, and even the death row inmates hated him. 10 years later, that death sentence was carried out, and he passed via lethal injection. 5 interesting stuff. Number 5. Some fish walk, like the sea robins. They have 6 leg-like appendages they use for walking on the sea floor. Or if you want one that walks on land, the mud skipper, a fish that lives on land and in the water. They can decide to breathe through their mouth. If their body is wet, they can breathe right through their skin. They're kind of a cool look into the early evolution of when our fish ancestors started to leave the water as well. Number 4. This is Hitler tweaking on meth at the 1936 Olympics. It's well documented from his personal physician's notes of his daily injections of amphetamines and opiates. By the end of his life, there was a paper trail of at least 800 injections during his rule over Germany, and he likely tried every substance available at the time. Number 3. Oh wait. Okay, now, number 3. The world's smallest reptile next to a human. If you look closely, you can see he takes up exactly 1 pixel, because he's just that shrimpy. Zoom in, and you can see just how small he is. Only around half an inch long, but still mighty to springtails and mites. So it's not always about the length of the lizard. To other brookies and nanas, he's average sized. Number 2. The highest point in the contiguous US is Mount Whitney in California, standing at 14,494 feet, and the lowest point is the famous Death Valley at 282 feet below sea level. It just so happens that these points are only around 80 miles apart, and if you wanted to, you could easily visit the lowest and the highest point in the same day. In number 1, highly realistic prosthetics are available and look nearly indistinguishable from the real thing, though you have to be paying a premium on an already expensive item, and the bigger and more complex a prosthetic, the more expensive. But who knows, in the not so distant future, you may be able to just regrow fingers yourself within a couple of years. 5 old stuff, from youngest to oldest. Number 5. Lincoln was known for his top hat. He was tall and it made him even taller, so his love for one made it fate that he was killed while wearing one. This is the hat from the day he was executed. It's in pretty bad condition considering how young it is. Number 4. This is lotion from 2,000 years ago. It was found in the Roman temple complex dedicated to Mars. It was last used in the year 2, and is the world's oldest cosmetic face cream. But even though it's 2,000 years old, it still has the finger marks on the lid from when it was last used. Number 3. And less of an object and more of a collection of writings, dating from 3,200 to 3,300 years old. The tomb of Queen Nefertiti. Paintings are found on nearly every surface of the tomb, and it's widely believed to be the most well-preserved decorations of a burial site in Egypt. And just 50 years later, off the west bank of Luxor, the tomb of Seti. Not as well-preserved, but still standing the construct of ancient human artists. And less than 100 years after that, the wall of the Templar of Ramses III. Just 3 of the many examples of how densely dated these huge projects were in Egypt. Number 2. This is one of the oldest, near fully preserved wagons. It's 4,000 years old and was found in modern-day Armenia. It's made of oak and now sits in the History Museum of Armenia. Not to be confused with the oldest known wagon wheel, discovered in Slovenia, that dates back to around 5,300 years old. And lastly, a 9,000-year-old cave painting. It depicts a shaman during a psychedelic mushroom trip. We tend to think old is old, but the time between this painting and King Tut in ancient Egypt is nearly double that of the time between us and King Tut. So this is our ancient history's ancient history. Religion is old, but the oldest one still practiced, being Hinduism, is around 4,000 years old. Double that number, and it's still not as old as this dude tripping on mushies. What's even crazier is this is only one of 15,000 prehistoric rock paintings and engravings in the south of Algeria, some dating back as far as 12,000 years old. The lie on September 11th. We all know what happened that day, but it's not the event that inspired Americans to do better to each other, but the personal stories from that event, one of the most famous being Red Bandana Man. The plane hit at 9:03, and by 9:12, Red Bandana Man, real name Wells, called his mother to leave a message, telling his mom he was okay. He hung up and actually traveled up to find survivors, running into some, one badly burned. He decided to carry the burned victim on his back, while leading the survivors to safety, to an intact stairway. He dropped them off and went back up for more survivors, wearing a red bandana as a mask, to cover his nose and mouth from dust and smoke. Stories like these were shared after the event to provide hope and to find the heroes of one of the lowest days in American history, the most famous living figure being Tanya Head, because she had, without a doubt, the most traumatic experience of all the survivors. After the plane hit, through the smell and pain of her own burning flesh, crawled in her smoke and flames to help people in worse conditions. Not only that, but she happened to be one of the 19 people to survive, who were positioned above the point of impact. She even ran into and was rescued by the infamous Red Bandana Man. With the story so powerful, she actually became the president of the World Trade Center Survivor Network. Her speech is famously started with, "I was there at the towers. I'm a survivor, and I'm going to tell you about that." In 2007, after she explained that she had a degree from Harvard and Stanford, they wanted to honor her, though they had no record of her ever being at the schools. Merrill Lynch, who she claimed to be employed with in the South Tower, also said they had no record of her. After this was uncovered, she canceled her next few interviews and stopped speaking to reporters. 20 days later, they removed her as the president of the Survivor Network. A newspaper in Barcelona revealed that she had been in class in Barcelona during the 9/11 attacks, and she actually told her classmates her scars were from a car accident and horseback riding, not from the fires on 9/11 that hadn't even happened yet. Tanya was exposed as an opportunistic liar and had not even been in the US until 2 years after the attack. After being exposed in 2008, an anonymous email had been sent out to the network that Tanya had actually took her own life. Then she was fired from her job in 2012 at an insurance company. So yeah, she lied about dying. And her name wasn't even Tanya, it was Alicia, leaving the most powerful, heroic, and inspiring figure on 9/11, a giant scam artist, only in it for the fame and the money. The last trace of her was visiting her mother in 2014. But since then, the 9/11 liar has all but disappeared from the face of the earth. The Cartoon Killer. Randy Stair, or more commonly referred to as Andrew Blaze, which was an online character he made up, grew up to live in Dallas, Pennsylvania. While living a mostly normal childhood, he had a bit of an obsession with the character named Ember from the popular Nickelodeon cartoon, Danny Phantom. Not only that, but on Wednesdays when his parents weren't home, he would dress up in traditionally women's clothing to subdue a feeling he had. He described that feeling as being one as a female soul trapped in a male's body. He felt for a while a woman inside of him had been trying to claw her way out. For the 4 years leading up to this event, he would contemplate when and where he would take his own life. One of his beliefs being that when he died, he would enter an animated afterlife where he could happily become a ghost girl. He believed this so much, in fact, that after incident autopsy revealed he was wearing, quote, female undergarments, unquote. And the event he believed would take him to this animated afterlife? A shooting at a grocery store. Along with his obsession with Ember, he also idolized the events of the Columbine High School. So much, in fact, Before the turn of events, he made an animated video of a school shooting and said that the West Market would officially become Columbine High School, and the only reason he didn't target his old high school is that it was demolished soon after he graduated. After entering into the West Market he was actually employed with, on the 8th of June 2017, he made his way to the back of the store with a duffel bag, one that held the weapons that he would soon use on his victims, but first decided to clock in and work, cleaning up the market. After about an hour on shift, he made his way to the back of the store, where he barricaded the emergency exits, then made his way back to the front of the store, where he locked the automatic doors. He opened the duffel bag and with weapon in hand, walked up to a coworker who was listening to music. He just stood behind her ominously while she worked, until she walked away, continuing stocking shelves. She didn't notice him and he spared her life for some reason. He then walked away and started his attack, taking the life of 3 other employees, and while taking the life of his 3rd victim, the coworker he spared finally saw him. They stared at each other, and after a few seconds she ran away and hid, and then a few minutes later, she actually escaped and called the police. After it was just him alone in the store, he walked around shooting random objects, except for the propane tanks, which he planned to explode, though they never did. By the time the police showed up, they found the deceased victims, along with Randy Stair's body.
Who could have guessed that somehow, some way, somehow, someday, we'd have to say goodbye.
Incel killers. If you don't know what an incel is, which I find that hard to believe, incel means involuntarily celibate, or someone who is unable to find a romantic partner. Their ideology lies in misogyny, and they believe in male supremacy. And if you aren't already waist deep into the incels, this is gonna sound crazy, but their main goal is disruption and distribution. They believe the world is run by beautiful men, codenamed Chad, and beautiful women, codenamed Stacy. Average people are normies, and incels are the untouchables, wanted by no one. They think if they can kill enough Chads, they will have enough power to overtake all the normies, and entrap all the Stacys, who would pretty much be prisoners to the incel society. As absurd as it sounds, we've actually seen some cases where people have tried to start the incel uprising. Alec Minison, who committed the vehicle ramming attack on April 23, 2018, in a rented van. He targeted random people in Ontario, Canada, and ended up killing 10 people and injuring 16 other.
Elliot Roger decided to essentially commit an uprising, a beta uprising, if you will,
right,
against the Chads and the Stacys.
It was Elliot Roger who was the father.
Basically, the founding forefather of the entire movement.
Right, right. So explain to me this movement. What's this movement about?
It's basically a movement of angry incels, such as myself, who are unable to get laid. Therefore, we want to overthrow the Chads, which would force the Stacys to be forced to reproduce with the incels.
Right.
In his interrogation after explaining incels and his motives, he cited being inspired by his friend, Elliot Rogers. Elliot is said to be the leader and the beginner of this uprising. He's had many videos on why Stacys don't go after gentlemen such as himself. His own crimes include killing 3 people by stabbing and 4 people by shooting. So far, incels have only killed 50 people in the US and Canada combined, but claim to only be at the beginning of their uprising. They also claim to be the far-right heroes ready to eliminate any human who stand in their way on their journey to redistribute women to their liking. Luckily, or unluckily depending on who you are, their efforts have been set back time and time again by, as they say, cancel culture, as it repetitively bans their communities to stop the outreach to more members of their terrorist rhetoric. As it stands right now, it doesn't look like incels will be taking over any countries. If hillbillies can take over the capital, I don't think a couple of untouchables can take over the world. But that's just my opinion. Top 3 most dangerous people in the world. Number 3, Mark Zuckerberg. I know what you're thinking. How was this dangerous? But as we've seen before, as the owner of the biggest media platform in the world, his own opinions can sway an estimated 2.8 billion other people's opinions, with 35% of the world's population citing in every month, not to mention the average age of the Zuckerberg platform is 40 years old, and the older people have all the money. Now we have the richest 35% population of the world, looking at what you personally deem appropriate, inappropriate, advertisable, and worthy to promote on the platform. With their wallets filled and their old mushy brains ready to believe any headline that pops up in bold, it could turn into a dangerous situation. Number 2, Elon Musk. While he doesn't have as much money as Jeff Bezos, and he doesn't own the biggest media platform like Marky, what he does have is public favor. He made people millionaires by sharing memes of dogs. He has over 57 million followers, and unlike Zark Zuckerberg, his followers seem to do anything he tells them, without question. Match that with purchasing and founding companies that he plans to rule the world with one day, and not only this world, but that world too. Who's to say he won't be the first leader of the planet of Mars? The money, the companies, the blind followers. It's a perfect storm to create whatever world he wants. And number 1, at the most dangerous, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong-un, and Joe Biden, and well, all these other people too. but you probably already know why. Any of these countries have the option to start a nuclear war, and it takes about 100 nukes to destroy a big country. So anyone on this list can eliminate any country they want, except North Korea obviously. But even one singular nuke is enough to kill 100,000 people. And I can't imagine another country just sitting by and letting that happen. Russia and the US both have enough to destroy every country separately, if they so choose to. So yeah, at any moment, without us even knowing, a nuclear war could start that would wipe out 90% of the world's population in about 45 minutes. And after a year, 99% of humans would dwindle. And really the only people with a chance of survival are those crazy doomsday preppers. So I guess make sure you know one of those guys.